Welcome back to Know Your True Self. This is part 3 of 4 recordings. Please make yourself comfortable.
Okay, so as it came up this morning, I think maybe it would be a good development of what I've said this morning to talk a little bit about this different level of consciousness, different levels of consciousness. So according to the Buddhist teachings, we talk about 8 consciousness, 8 levels. So the first 5, I already said, are related to sense organs. So there's consciousness of view, the consciousness of taste, the consciousness of feeling, the consciousness of hearing, and so on. Touch. So those are the 5 first levels. First in the sense, we have to start by one side. You have to start somewhere. So traditionally we talk about this first 5 consciousness as being related with the sense organs. And as I told you before, I remember reading, I can't say where anymore, but I remember reading that even in science, in the scientific approach, they have now come to understand that there is a sort of function or sort of aspect of consciousness related to each one of our senses, and they can't coexist in the same moment. So we can't really truly hear and feel or hear and taste at the same time, exactly at the same time. So, and then there is the mental consciousness. That's the 6th one. Mental consciousness means the ability to be aware of those other consciousness and be aware of whatever mental events, thoughts or emotions or things like this happen. So this is the 6th consciousness. It's called what we normally would call consciousness in our sense. So it's the level of mental activity and the capacity of being aware of that mental activity. So the consciousness of the senses cannot be aware of themselves. They can only be aware of some stimuli. Stimuli? Well, anyway, if there is a sound consciousness, hearing consciousness can be aware of the sound, but it can't be aware of itself. It's the mental consciousness that can be aware of being aware of the sound. See what I mean? They're extremely subtle, these things. That gives us the measure of how deep they have investigated in Buddhism, just by watching, with no electrodes or things like this, just by watching, sitting quietly, sitting in stillness, and just watching how it works. And then there is, and this mental consciousness can be aware of itself, but can also be aware of the other ones, so aware of sound but only one thing at a time. Okay? So that's why we were talking about how difficult it is for this mental consciousness to have clarity, because when we are sort of we are being, bombarded by so many information at the same time. It can't really be aware of everything, so it has to jump from one point to the other, and that's where restlessness comes from, and then it becomes a habit. And then if we don't have it, then we try to find it. It becomes a habit to be constantly busy, and if for some reason things sort of calm down, we will create that busyness by ourselves, inventing new things to be aware of, because we just can't help it. Then there is this 7th consciousness, which is a very interesting one. it's the totally dispensable one, because it is the consciousness of that adds an additional layer to this process, the additional layer of I, or meaning the sense that there is someone who is the owner of that experience, the one who is experiencing it. So it doesn't add anything else. I mean, you won't be clever, or you won't be able to be more, to understand things better, or anything. It just adds this layer of, it can become very solid if confronted, for instance. I mean, if someone says something that upsets us, or if we become defensive, then it becomes very solid. But even if there is no such a threat, there's still this sort of diffuse sense of I'm here. I am hearing this or that. I am sensing this or that. This is my experience. So this is this layer of the identity, the feeling of being different somehow from the experience itself. And it has a name, I forgot, but in the Tibetan teachings they give a name for this consciousness, but it's actually the one that we could very well live without, because it doesn't add anything, and it creates a problem. It creates a big problem, like it creates all our problems, not because of the diffuse sense of identity, because if it's diffused it might be not be that much in the way. But once it's confronted, once it sort of notices itself as being something different, or recognizes this sort of ownership of its own experience, then all the problems come from that. You become defensive, or you become aggressive, or and you start to feel like you're victim or whatever. And this is where what we generally consider as ego starts. In Buddhism. So it's the ego. Many times we are kind of very confused about this for many reasons. One of them is that this word, of course, didn't exist in Tibetan. It's a Latin word, and it came to the English or Western languages from psychotherapy or psychoanalysis or all this. So in which it has a very different meaning. It's perhaps not a very different meaning, but it has a very different connotation and context. So it's a tricky word. Actually, in Tibetan, the word that has been translated as ego means lord or owner.
What is the word in Tibetan?
Dak. Dak means lord, like Dakpo, or Dak can mean, like the lord of the land or something like this. But it also very generically means owner. And if we look closely to this sense of I, we will find there is this sense of ownership. When I say, even more perhaps than the one who experiences, because it's, yes, I experience, but it is my experience. So in the end, yes, there is someone who is experiencing it, but this person or this entity is owning its own experience. So there is actually, yes, very much this sense of ownership. As we express it very naturally we say my body, we say my mind, isn't it? So we put ourselves in the position of being the owner of the body and of the mind. So, which means that even though we identify ourselves with the body and with the mind, we clearly, not confusing it, or let's say, we clearly identify with it, but at the same time put ourselves outside the body and outside the mind as someone who owns them, right? So that's also something that we never really investigated, because where could that being be if it's somewhere outside the body and outside the mind? Where is it? Where is it living, or what is it made of? What is its nature? But we never question ourselves about that once again, So we just assume that when we say this, it's not just a way of saying, it actually reflects. Maybe it can go both ways. It reflects the way we feel. Perhaps by saying this, we learn to feel in a certain way also, been transmitted to us, because everybody speaks in these terms. So this is the layer of the sense of identity, and which is normally, that we normally mistake for who we are. And it's done, it starts with a sense of I, which comes from this, which is embedded in this layer of consciousness, but then it structures, or it sort of builds up around a few or a lot of characteristics that we decided to hold on to as our personality, or as our history, or as who we are. And those characteristics can be, pleasant, like we find ourselves intelligent or handsome, or things like this, or unpleasant. We hate ourselves. We find we are not worth. Yeah, well, we have no sort of value, or we are incapable of doing anything right, or we are ugly, or whatever. So accordingly, we sort of have a sense of identity which is more or less functional, and sometimes totally dysfunctional, and we come to develop a certain feeling towards that identity. Let's say we like it or we don't like it. So we basically like ourselves or not. That's what we mean by, this word that didn't exist when I was a child, self-esteem. It's a very new concept for me. I sort of disappeared from the world for a certain number of years when I became a Buddhist, and I went and lived in a community and things like this. I didn't disappear from the world, but I wasn't hearing any news or reading any papers. And then suddenly when I came back, like 25 years later, there was this strange concept of self-esteem, what is that? Because, when I was young, of course, some people didn't like themselves and some others were very proud, but we didn't call it like that, at that time. It was just something that we had not yet conceptualized into a concept or something. So anyway, so this layer or this thing is also made for many different pieces. We, of course, take many things from our education, from our childhood, but we can hold on to things that we consider as our identity, and it can be a lot of different things. It can be memories. That's one very common thing. We hold on to memories. If we for instance, start a new relationship, close relationship, probably we will spend together the first 6 months or the first 6 months of the relationship telling each other our stories. When I was young, I did this and that. When I was a child, my mother, and when I went to that's presenting ourselves. So, stories and memories, and even if they're not very accurate, because generally they aren't. We think we remember things very accurately, but it's very unlikely, actually. Many times it's more like things that we have built up or embellished sometimes, or on the contrary, put some dark colors on it. But anyway, stories is a big part. But then we can sort of, anything can become, anything that we think we own can actually become a sort of enhancement for our sense of identity. Like a new phone, a certain brand of phones or computers or such. Yeah, I will find myself like if I am a better person, not better in the sense, but I am enhanced if I can have an iPhone or a nice car, or because for me it is a new aspect of who I think I am, and that aspect puts me, makes me resemble to a certain number of people, which for me are the symbol of something good or something better. When we are teenagers, this is very important, because we are sort of building a much structured sense of identity. So we really want to hang around with those with whom we want to identify, and we want to be far away, generally from our parents, because we absolutely don't want to look like them, to be considered like them or something like that. So, but actually this tendency runs all our lives. It's just very critical when we are teenagers, because that's where we sort of suddenly wake up to this sense of I have to become someone, or I'm starting to be someone distinct from the others. But it goes on all our lives. We try to obtain and maintain, or things that we think enhance ourselves, and we try to run away or reject the things that might degrade the idea that we have of ourselves. And if we lose something that has become a big part, a big chunk of our identity, that will be probably the moment where we realize in the first place that that thing was that important for us. Previously to that, we perhaps didn't even realize that we were attached to that thing. But when we suddenly lose it, we feel a sense of less, not only lack, but a sense of having become lessened. I am less a person than I was when I had that thing. Let's say, for instance, I lose my job, and I have less money, and so instead of here in England is not an issue as much as in Portugal. In Portugal, people still attach a lot of importance to driving a car or having a nice car or going to work driving his own car. So let's say we are in Portugal and someone loses his job, or has less money, and he has to use public transportation because he can't afford to be driving his car every day. So one might feel very uncomfortable, and not necessarily because of having to take the public transportation, but because in doing that, we might feel that our status or our, the idea that we have of ourselves, or the idea of others have of myself, may have been sort of had a little degradation, or it was a little bit, it's a little bit less than. So we might struggle much longer with the problem of identity than with the actual problem of taking, a public transportation. After 2-3 days, we have realized the timetable, so it's not an issue anymore. You can just wake up at a certain time and then take breakfast at a certain time, and you have realized how many minutes you take into the next stop walking, and then you know how more or less how long it will take to get to the place where you want to go. So that is not the problem anymore. But you can struggle with that for months, not because of the practical problems, but because you cannot adjust, you cannot accept to this new image of yourself, being someone who takes a public transportation. See what I mean? So most of our problems are this sort of problems, not actual problems. It's very easy to make our way around practical problems. The hard thing to let go is this part, is the part where we might find that our sense of identity has been robbed from something. And this is already a little hint about the subject of tomorrow. One of the things who leaves the biggest hole in our sense of identity is a breakup, because nothing is more enhancing than another person. And actually, the fact that this other person comes into our life and that the place that person will occupy, gives us also a new sense of identity. We start feeling that I am now this person, but I am this person with that other person being part of me. So when that person leaves or dies or is not there anymore, our sense of identity is strongly shaken, and there is a strong sense of something lacking. And there, of course, there are many aspects to this. I'm not saying that there is not love and all these things we'll see tomorrow, but the sort of the bitter part, what makes us bitter is this, not actually thinking that the person might find love somewhere else. It's not because he might find love somewhere else, it's because it has been removed from my identity, and that's what hurts. And that's why many times people, when they break up, they tear each other apart, because you're so angry that person or that part of your identity is going to be removed from your sense of identity. And then it's a long process, as exactly the same, but in a much stronger way. It's a long process. It's the same way of taking public transportation. It takes a long time before you recreate a new sense of identity, and eventually you find a way to fill up the gap with something else or someone else. That's we generally tend to jump into another relationship because we are addicted to having this sense of someone giving us a sense of fullness or something like that. And of course, if it's done too quickly, then it generally is a catastrophe because it doesn't go well if it's too quickly. But anyway, this is another subject, another matter. But the thing is, this seventh consciousness that creates this sense of ownership as a totally abstract identity or entity that you cannot place anywhere because you can't find it anywhere, seems to be different from mind and body, isn't it? And yet, if it's different from mind and body, where would it be? You know, where would it stay? How can it maintain itself if it doesn't depend on the body and it doesn't depend on the mind, and is someone or some entity that is exactly made of what? You know, by analyzing like this, we cannot help ourselves to come to the conclusion that we cannot find it. Yes, there is no true existence, it's just an abstraction, it's just a conceptualization. We have just conceptualized the idea that there is an owner for this experience, and that's when in certain philosophies or even religions we come with the concept of soul. Then the soul is some sort of thing that nobody really can find or even describe or define, but who would be the owner of all of this? So this concept, that's why in Buddhism you will find many words, like as much words as the languages have, because in Tibetan there are many words for mind, but in English, for instance, we only have two possible choices, mind and consciousness, and there is not much more. But we would never use the word soul, because it points, not that it's bad in itself, but it points to a meaning of something that it's a bit an abstraction, which it doesn't point to anything concrete. It's just, made up, in a sense. So there is this lady, I'm sure you all heard about her, Jill Bolte Taylor. She is a neuroscientist, American, and when she was in her 30s, I think, 35 or 38, she had a massive stroke on that paralyzed the left hemisphere of her brain. She was alone at home, and because of her, scientific mind, she said, when she realized what was happening, she said, that's great, now I can observe what is happening. Well, she was still trying to ask for help, but it took a very long time to be able to call someone and, ask for help. But then what happened, and she has a marvelous presentation on TED, this American, there are many movies in YouTube and TED also, and she has also a series of, I think, 4 interviews with Oprah, in which she even develops further she tells her experience and things like this. And she actually came to the conclusion that the sense of I was in the left hemisphere. It's a sort of conceptualization coming from language. It's just a word which leads to a concept, and then it becomes so solid that we are capable of killing someone just because he said something nasty about that owner that we can't find anywhere. So by having a left hemisphere paralyzed, she had a whole world of experiences without the sense of ownership. She couldn't find, or she couldn't sense any difference between her and the world, or between her and her experience. There were no one experiencing it. So it's extremely interesting, because we then, through her experience, we can understand, and through a description, we can understand exactly how each hemisphere works, and what what kind or what sort of experience we have, or what sort of experience each one of them bring into our experience. There is this linear thinking mode of the left hemisphere, in which you can understand the words, and then she lost totally the sense of she couldn't speak and she couldn't understand any word, but she could still feel a lot of things. She said, and that when she woke up in the hospital, she had lost, of course, all her memories. She had lost all her sense of identity. She wasn't anymore Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, and her mom came to see her, and she had no clue who that person was, but she could still sense love coming from her. So, this gives us a sort of idea that when we function with our left hemisphere more than with the right one, we'll, like she was saying, for instance, someone came in through my door to see me when I was in hospital. I could sense if that person was a loving person, or if it was someone who was giving or someone who was taking. But if she had no clue if it was a doctor or a nurse or a family or a friend, or you see what I mean? We tend to see first, or perhaps only, what that person's role is. When I see someone coming through my door and I have not been paralyzed from the left hemisphere, I will see a doctor, or I will see my mom, or I will see a friend. And perhaps even I won't be, because I will be so obsessed with the fact that it's the doctor, and that I'm going finally to be able to ask him if what is going wrong with me or something like this. I won't be able to feel if it's a nice person, if he's coming has a loving attitude, or you see what I mean? And what happened with her was just the opposite. She couldn't say what that person was, but she could sense what that person expressed, or what was his state of mind, or things like this. Well, it's a bit beyond our purpose here, but our subject. But just to give you an idea that this sense of identity is extremely problematic, because that's from where all our problems come. And also this identity is not only it's created, by us but in an unconscious way. I mean, we are not consciously creating this. It just comes as experience, comes in the sense that the tendency to have it, it's there. But then we build it and we enhance it with whatever materials we have, And that's how many things in life, even opinions, preferences, tastes, ideas, values, even causes, or like you're fighting for a cause or something. All of this can become, and often becomes, identity. Even a football team. Why do these hooligans almost kill each other? When they belong to different. It seems crazy if you're not part of that, but actually it's not different than any other fight. It's just that instead of fighting for a sort of a personal identity, they have espoused a sort of collective identity, and then they think that whoever is from the other party, or whether it is political or anything, it's just someone to aggress and to. There shouldn't be any Manchester United, something like that, So all of our problems come from this level, this seventh consciousness that is totally useless, and we could easily dismiss. Then there is the eighth consciousness, which is called the basic consciousness, which is the deepest level of consciousness where there isn't any characteristic. It's just the basic awareness capacity, or the potential of being aware, of being conscious. And if it's flawed by duality or ignorance, or it's unclear in this knowledge, it has been flawed by duality, by the sense that there is separation or something like that, is called the alaya in Sanskrit, alaya, or it means base. Or if that subtle, very subtle ignorance veil is removed, then it's wisdom. So it is the most basic state of consciousness where there isn't any characteristic, or it's just pure awareness in a sense, a pure capacity of being aware. So these are the eight consciousnesses. I know it's quite a subtle and subject, and it's I'm not an expert. This is my basic level of understanding, but I think it might be helpful to have a clue about all this, especially concerning the seventh consciousness, because it actually has everything to do with our subject, in the sense of knowing our true self is also knowing what our true self is not, and everything that is in that seventh consciousness as a sense of ownership or identity is absolutely not who we are. It's just the story, it's just a bunch of things that we got used to associate with our sense of ownership, with our sense of being. And if you see, if you watch yourself, if we watch ourselves overreacting to things, like having a total strange and excessive reaction to something someone said, or we can be pretty sure that that's from where it comes, And when egos are in defense mode, there is absolutely no dialogue that is possible, because both, like if two people are confronting, they will be both defending this identity and with the feeling that they cannot allow the other one to retrieve something, some piece of it, or even not having the last word in an argument is felt like degrading. You have this feeling that your ego or your sense of identity has been lessened, isn't it? We do. We tend to, try to have the last word, try to, or then compensate. Sometimes we can't really have the last word with someone, but then we can have a last word with someone else. So when we feel like, I should have said this, we turn to someone who is weaker than we are, or like for instance, you had an argument with your boss, and you couldn't tell him what you would have liked to say. So you would say some nasty thing to the cleaning lady, or to someone that cannot respond. But this is your way to compensate, to sort of rebuild your ego, your mind. I mean, we all do this. It's a way to rebuild ourselves, to get the sense of, okay, now I made it whole again. There was a scratch in my beautiful armor, or not or shell, and then I polish, and now it's shining again. We all have that. And in last resource, we ladies tend to go shopping, which is a very good way to feel great again. Once we have bought, unless we have put on a few pounds, and then you get down again because nothing suits you, nothing fits you, and but then you can always buy shoes. It's quite safe. Yeah, now I lost a few pounds, but there's a moment where there are certain shops, certain brands that don't make big sizes. So when you go into one of those shops, the only thing you can buy is a scarf. All the rest won't fit you, or shoes. Yeah, that's fine too. So this is a bit how the structure of the consciousness, how the consciousness is structured, and it may sound very technical or a bit abstract, but actually, if we observe all this, we will easily find that it might be helpful to have this understanding, especially concerning my furnace lightning with the. But it's not because of that. Sometimes it interferes with the recording, so it's better to put on flight mode. Anyway, it might be helpful to understand this thing about identity and how it works and how we would kill to remain at the top of the game, to remain the one who has it all, and So when we say things like in the mind training, things like, for instance, giving the victory to others and accepting defeat or things like this, it's not that much about something. It's not an advice about what to do. It's about how to feel, and how to let go of this need to have the last word, of this need to be the last one to speak, the need to be assured that you got it. I mean, you won, and accepting this defeat inwardly. Afterwards, it doesn't matter what you do. If you have a very outer situation, whatever you do, if you do it from this place where you understand that the point is not to win or to lose, but it doesn't really matter, then whatever you actually do, it will be fine. So, and we also understand that from all the Buddhist teachings, and especially those on mind training, which insist so much in all this letting go of the ego, letting go of this self-cherishing, it's not a moral thing, or it's not something that if you do that, then you are a very nice person. That's not the thing. The thing is, since all our problems come from this holding on to this identity and reinforcing it constantly through all means, everything we do tends to reinforce it. And it's not only happy things or pleasant things. Even pain and suffering can also reinforce this, and often do reinforce very much this sense of identity. Because if I'm suffering, I'm very much focused on myself, isn't it? And the more I focus on myself, the more I suffer. So this is a sort of endless knot. One thing strengthens the other, and it goes like this all the time. So thinking of others, or giving the victory to others, or it sort of untightens the thing and diverts our focus from ourselves, and suddenly everything is much lighter and much less pain. So all the mind training teachings in Buddhism are designed to help us let go of this obsession and, sort of loosen this sense of, this tight sense of identity. When everything goes well, not too good and not too bad, life is just, flowing, we almost can't feel it, It's there, but it's, sort of sleeping or drowsing or something. But then if something very good, if we suddenly have lots of success and everybody, you wrote your book and everybody comes to ask for you to sign it or something, you might, it sort of tightens a bit. And if you're suffering, same thing. Suffering is not necessarily, it's quite, sometimes people who have suffered a lot became much better people, much more interested in helping others and things like this. But it also can have the opposite effect. Some people have suffered and became really nasty people. And the difference is whether they used or whether this suffering tightened their sense of identity or loosened it, And it all comes, the difference between both comes with acceptance or non-acceptance. Because fighting whatever is happening tightens your sense of identity even more. And accepting loosens it. So that's the breaking point. From there on, that's when you go through separate ways. If you tighten, if you fight it, it becomes worse. If you loosen it and you accept it, it becomes much better. And then it works as a Dharma practice, because all Dharma practices are intended to be tools for wearing off this sense of identity, removing it and wearing it off. So if you have a tool already there, something that will do that job for you, which is suffering, it's better to use it, isn't it? It's there. You don't have to, go to India to attend fancy teachings and, receive pith instructions and have lots of hours of jet lag and all of that. It's there. You're going through a difficult situation. And this situation in itself, if we manage to accept it and broaden our horizon and, see that it is not happening only to us, but it has been countless people to whom these sort of things happen, and there will be countless people who will go through similar experiences, then, that suffering that you are going through can be a very efficient way to wear off this identity, which is, making ourselves miserable and creating all the problems. Okay, what time is it? Would anyone like to ask a question? Oh, okay. I don't know, whoever. Yeah, maybe in the front.
When I focus on myself, or I let myself down, is that 7 and 6 interacting?
It's what?
Is it 7 and 6 interacting?
What does that mean, sorry?
Consciousness.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought that was some...
You talked about focusing on yourself. When I focus on myself, is that those two consciousness interacting with one another?
7 and 6. Oh yeah, I see. Yes, of course, yeah. The mental consciousness and there are all different aspects. It's not like totally different layers.
Right.
It's just different aspects of the conscious phenomenon. The simple fact of being conscious right now, and in being conscious and as we are speaking, all of those consciousnesses are present, of course. Yeah? So yes, we can say it's the 7th and the 6th aspect interacting, yeah.
I have when you were talking earlier about the sense of identity, very specifically being hit when you have a breakup. And that gap in the identity you often try to fill by trying to find somebody else, which is fairly relevant because that's exactly what I'm going through at the moment. But obviously I'm aware of this. I've been aware because of being fascinated by Buddhism and meditation. I'm aware of sitting like ego sort of looking. But any thoughts on how to try and fill the gap, or that's not filling a gap, because it's breaking down of the being aware that there isn't a gap to be filled on whole anyway. It's just trying to.
Well, I mean,
any tips on just reminders to sort of when I fall down that hole.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, I understand. Well, I think, of course, we are human beings. We are all driven by our sense of identity, be it stronger or weaker, but that's what drives us. So whenever we face a crisis, whether it's a breakup or some sort of identity crisis, because something very essential for us, it can be status, it can be profession, it can be sentimental, it can be anything, but something very fundamental that took a great deal of space in your life, even in your timetable, even in your schedule, or in your sense of who you are, is removed, then there is this sense of emptiness, actually, yeah. I know we all know that feeling, isn't it? Even sometimes, for instance, the sudden death of someone close to us, even if it's not our close relationship, but a friend who suddenly died, and it was very sudden, and you have this sense of it's like you're facing a huge cliff or a huge, and there is a sense of it's not real. You know what I mean? If you're like floating in when it's very sudden. It's like everything else became unreal at that moment. Things that were very, habitual and all your routine, and it suddenly breaks totally apart, and you feel like you're facing a big abyss or something really. And we, for a few days or sometimes just a few hours, depends how strongly it hits you. You feel like you're in an empty. Plane? No, not plane. Plateau or something, like everything is empty or not real. But anyway, I think no untrained human being can remain like that forever. So we need and we struggle to fill that space quite quickly. The thing, if we manage to do that, would be to take advantage of the experience of understanding how things fail us, certain things fail us, and try to fill that gap with other things, like practice of meditation, and not totally, of course. I mean, you can, of course, take vows and become a monk and go to a monastery, but very few people will do that, So it doesn't mean that all the empty space that remained in your life after a breakup has to be filled with that, but at least we should understand that it's not the fault of anyone, it's not the fault of even of objects or things or, circumstances or anything. It's just that we put our trust into things that can't be trusted. I'm not saying that the person with whom, for instance, we are sharing our lives, it cannot be trusted in that sense, but it will not be there forever, so it can't replace refuge, or you know what I mean? So you don't have to fill all your life with refuge, but at least you have to realize at that moment that what is left that you can really hold on to is that, not the external or the outer refuge, but what you can take from that and as being your anchor, as being your core, as being, your fundamental and most profound resource to be able to cope with extremely difficult situations. And when you realize that, then you invest a little bit more of your energy and you give it a little bit more space in your life than previously. And then, of course, life goes on, and you find a hobby or you find a new partner or whatever. And many people do that, and I saw that hundreds of times. People who are in the middle of a breakup or like professional crisis or whatever, and they come and to the sessions and they begin being very interested. Everything is fantastic, and they are really totally thrilled with Buddhism. And then they find a new partner, and we can't see them ever again, until the next breakup, if there is one. So this happens because actually it's more like we haven't been yet totally disillusioned about the value of all these things. It's not that we can't trust people. That is also true, because since we are all driven by our own interest in the first place, unless we actually do a serious work upon ourselves, it's true that even people who say they love you forever, might as well tomorrow just find someone else. It's possible, and we should be able to not be angry with them, because maybe it could happen to us also. We are all the same. We are all driven by our own interest, first of all, and then if others serve our purpose, good. And when they stop serving our purpose, then we let go. So it's like Ringu Tulku has this way of putting it. Like you shouldn't expect people to be good to you. It's not meaning that you should expect that they are going to be mean to you, but you know what I mean. What happens normally is that we expect people to be very correct and very, and very loving and very caring, and then we often end up disappointed because they're not like that. So he puts it the other way around. We shouldn't expect that, and then when they are, we should be very happy. So it's a bit like that. So I think in life, when we are in a situation where we find ourselves quite empty, if we are ordinary people will just try as quickly as possible to fill the gap with anything. A little bit, people who have done a little bit of work on themselves, have any clue about all of this, they will realize that this sort of emptiness doesn't really come from something not fulfilling his purpose or something like that. It's much more fundamental. Is that because I trusted things that weren't trustworthy. So he will sort of settle for a compromise between, filling the gap and finding more space for more valuable things. And if we are a top level practitioner, we can just acknowledge that empty space as being our true nature, and thrive to go beyond duality and appreciate that emptiness. But I mean, that's probably not our level for the moment. So I think we're still in this middle class level where we will, of course, try to, fill up again this empty hole and understand a little bit better which things might, or which practice, or which things are trustworthy, and cultivate those a little bit more.